Welcome. I'm Lori Lee Binstock, and this is a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. Thank you for joining us for a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast on Mental Health News Radio Network. This podcast is also available wherever you get your podcasts, but I do suggest checking out Mental Health News Radio Network to find all your podcasts related to mental health. Today's guest is Merle Yost. Merle is a psychotherapist, author of 6 books, including his latest, Facing the Truth of Your Life. He has been a private practice therapist for over 30 years and specializes in trauma, men sexually abused as children, and bi and gay heterosexual married men. After growing up in a cult and being sexually abused as a child, his healing journey has led him to help others and claim their power and their lives. Merle, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, absolutely. First, I want to hear a little bit about your story and kind of how you got into this work.
It was never the plan.
It never is. It never is.
My mother programmed me to be a doctor and a singer. I actually was a music major originally in college because I didn't really want to be a doctor. Um, and when I bombed out of that because I couldn't focus well enough, I was really too dissociated. I didn't really understand that until later. And when I went into therapy and figured out that I had been pretty horrifically sexually abused, and that was really the root of all of the dissociation, which was really extensive because I had mostly occluded memory, repressed memories. And so it was actually during a training session for learning how to do EMDR that it was the very first training session and this is back in about 1993, ancient history, with Francine Shapiro. This was with the founder of EMDR. And they told us that we were going to do our first practice session on it. And they wanted to pick something simple that wasn't going to cause any big drama or problems. And so I'd always had this long phobia of tall buildings. I look up at a tall building and just about pass out. It just kill me. And so we'll try this. And about 30 seconds into doing the EMDR, all of a sudden my head went back, a cock went down my throat, and I was gone. I was totally dissociated. And it took me a long time to get back. So that was the beginning of opening up what had happened and starting to deal with the aftermath of that. So it literally changed my life. And so I was already a therapist at that point, but I had gone into therapy. There's a story I tell about my very first therapy session because I was clearly a mess. And one of my roommates at the time when I was in college said, "You need therapy," which I didn't. I didn't even understand how badly I needed therapy. So I saw this really wonderful therapist for several years. But in the very first session, we're sitting there and she says, "You seem really anxious. Are you afraid of me?" And I said, "No." She said, "What are you afraid of?" I said, "What's inside of me?" So on some level, I understood there was a lot going on there that I didn't understand or how to deal with. And so my honesty about that was really the beginning of healing. And the first of 3 therapists that I worked with over the course of my time. And I put in I don't know, roughly 20 years of therapy. So I was really determined to root that out. And it was with the growing up in the situation I did in the cult and with the sexual abuse and all of the other stuff that went with that, it was a really pretty awful childhood. So, but in the course of doing therapy, I realized that this was where my interests lie. This is it. As I was watching myself heal, this was what was my passion. And I was deep in the New Age movement at that point. And so it was all about self-growth and so forth. So it just naturally came together, gave me an outlet to actually take what I've learned and learn a lot more and make it useful.
Wow, I love what you said when you were honest with yourself, because I think that's where most people it's kind of what blocks people from actually healing because they can't be honest with themselves. I couldn't be honest with myself for 20 years. It was really difficult. And then when I was kind of forced to look at myself, it was like that was when all the healing and growth and everything happened, right? Um, did you when you said these your memories were repressed of the sexual abuse, what did you was it always in the back of your mind that you just tried to push away, or it was one of those things that you just
It
completely
was,
forgot?
it was completely blocked out. One of
Mm,
the best ways to create uh, occluded memories or amnesia is to suffocate someone. And I was this tiny little 9-year-old little boy with this
mm,
large cock going down my throat, and I couldn't breathe. And so I was suffocating.
wow.
It was the beginning of chronic sleeplessness. I'd stay up all night in my bed, uh, trying to stay safe. And because I'd repressed the memory, I didn't know why I was doing this, but I just couldn't sleep. And so years of chronic insomnia, and it really screwed up my life on so many levels. I can't tell you. So,
Wow. And and I think it's really interesting about your mom. She wanted you to be a doctor. That wasn't where you're supposed to. That was also where my parents were. My parents said you're going to be a doctor, and I just remember thinking like I don't I can't. There's no interest in me being a doctor for me to be a doctor, and like any other thing was just no. Like, no, maybe I could do this. No, I don't think so. As if it were their decision.
well, yeah,
And
that's so interesting that parents can be so intrusive in trying to shape their children, making them being what they want them to be as opposed to being who they are.
right.
And that is, of course, the definition of love is accepting someone for who they are. And so a parent is telling you, if they're trying to control you, that we'll only love you if you become what I want you to become, and if you be the way I want you to become. And that's how they control and manipulate. And that's
Yeah.
all too common in all too many families. So if you do what I want you to do, I love you. If you don't, then I don't love you anymore. So
Yep, that's about right. That's about right. That's where I was. And then I
yeah.
couldn't figure out what I wanted to do for the longest time.
Well,
Because it's
yeah.
like, do I do what I want to do or do I do what they said I should do, but I don't want to do that?
Yeah, I went into business and was very successful. But in some ways, it was so easy. It was effortless for me to, because are you familiar with the Enneagram by any chance?
Mm-mm.
It's a very, it's a very good characterological personality typing system.
Ah. Mhm.
And anyway, it's a really great description of me when people at that type. But so I learned it as part of my graduate program, and it's really an effective, quick way to assess personality structure and how to interact with a person. If you understand what their number is, because there's 9 different types, it tells you how they're going to interact with you and how they're going to look toward making contact with you. It's really fabulous. But anyway, um, so my structure was my characterological structure is it's always about the truth, which is
Mhm.
the one thing my parents did not want me to know about much anything, as it turned out. Uh, but so I was, and I could smell when somebody wasn't telling you the truth, and so I would go after it. And so it was just so business in some ways was really easy. It was so straightforward, cut and dried in a way. And being a manager, I could see people and I honored them, and I always had these really good employees at consequence. But my bosses would say, "How do you have such good employees?" Because I'm good at picking people.
Nice. Yes. You
Changes
can
everything.
read people. You're
Yeah.
more empathetic. You right? Because you've been in survival mode for so long. It's like you are always aware of your environment and who's
Yes.
around you. So that is there that's a great way to use the trauma that you experienced.
Did
Um
the best I could.
right, we all try to. I want to talk about boundaries. I briefly mentioned about, chatting about boundaries. I want to know what your thoughts are about boundaries because you had a whole workshop focused on boundaries. Is that correct?
Oh, I still do. I've been
Oh.
doing them for years. They were live workshops initially. I'm doing a full day in person one that was life changing to people, but then COVID hit.
COVID.
COVID changed everything. And then I went into an online 3-hour version. It wasn't nearly as satisfying because it couldn't go into the same depth. And so eventually I created a 7-step workshop called 7 Steps to Powerful Boundaries workshop, which teaches people what boundaries really are, how they really work, and how to make them work for you.
Mm.
And the So I'll do a short lecture on boundaries here, if that's
Yes,
okay with
please.
you.
No, I find it fascinating. Yes.
The essence of boundaries is where you stop and they start. It's really that simple. That is the boundary. Unfortunately, way too much of our socialization from our families in particular, it's about merging. It's about feeling your feelings and being in your stuff, and them being in you're being in their stuff, and them being in your stuff, and that's just wrong on every level. The only time that is acceptable is when a baby is under 18 months of age, because you have to be merged with the baby in order to track what's going on with them, because they can't tell you.
Right.
And then 18 months to 3 years of age, you start to withdraw. And at 3 years of age, you need to be completely out of there, because if you're still in there, you're intruding upon the development of their sense of self.
Mm.
And the way you build a sense of self is back through the continual reflection of the parent of your external experience. You eventually internalize that, and it goes, oh, this is me. It's amazing how that works. And so we don't understand, because of our socialization, that merging is bad. We want to walk in and just suck up everything like a vacuum cleaner, and then we have to try and get rid of it. And it's so much better if you don't take it up in the beginning. And it's much easier to know what's going on without absorbing. I'll tell this short story. I tell this in the workshop. This is that I work out with personal trainers a lot, and I walked into the gym one morning and I saw my trainer. I said, "Good morning." I said, "How are you?" He said, "Great." And I said, "No, you're not." His response was, "Goddamn psychic psychotherapists." But I knew he was actually in really bad shape at the time. I could tell. I just knew. So the way we're all made up of energy. We're all made of atoms. And so once you understand that we're just in this energetic bubble, each one of us, and so the fantasy is that those bubbles merge and two shall become as one. Well, that means you're completely lost in their stuff, they're lost in your stuff, and you're taking on everything that they have. And that's just really bad. So once you learn how to stay inside of your bubble and make contact with their bubble, not merge with it, make contact, then when you get contact, you're going to know everything that's going on inside of there without absorbing it.
I need to know more.
I mean, otherwise, if I absorbed all of my clients' stuff, I'd be dead at the end of the day. And when therapists learned how to do this, it changed their lives and their practice, because they suddenly had energy to go home and be with their families and not be exhausted and trying to figure out how to get rid of all this crap that they absorbed over the day. So so the core of what I teach is energetic boundaries, how these bubbles work, how to make contact without absorbing, how to read what's going on inside of their bubble so that you know what's going on, what you choose to interact with or not. We do it unconsciously. We go to a restaurant or a place and it feels bad to us on some level, so we just leave because it doesn't feel right. So the same thing works with people. but people don't really have the vocabulary to understand how this interacts, and that's what the workshop gives them, this vocabulary over the 7 steps. And so the most basic part of boundaries is what I call the dance of intimacy. Our families teach us how to be in connection with other people. We learn from our dad how to be in a relationship with men. We learn from our mom how to be in a relationship with women. And then we just take that out in the world and assume this is how it's going to be everywhere. And we get surprised that it's not. But so we have to unlearn that dance, and we have to learn how to stay inside our bubble and stay present with us and our experience of being in the world, and checking in what's going on around us and reading it. Because we take our dance of intimacy to our workplaces and turn our bosses into our parents, and we try to work out any unfinished business with them. We marry one of our parents, usually the one we have the most stuff with, because we really want to work this out in our marriage. That's just so exciting. So that's a wrong way to do it.
Yep.
So I'm offering an alternative to that via my 7 steps to powerful boundaries.
I'm just curious, are you willing to share what are the 7 steps?
Oh, sure. Step one is going back to your childhood. Looking at those boundaries that you learned from them and what you learned from your family about it was like to be in a relationship and so forth. And if someone, for example, if someone's primary method of teaching or of parenting you is shaming and humiliation, then you go out into the world, look for other people who are going to shame and humiliate you because that's what your definition of intimacy and contact is.
Yep. Yep, that's about right. That's where you're comfortable.
Right. Well, it's just the dance of intimacy, and then you look for that partner that's going to humiliate you and go, yes, I'm home.
Oh, goodness.
So what you have to get conscious about is what's going on before you can actually do something about it. Step two is simply a very basic, it's the most academic piece of the whole workshop, where I just go through like the 15 major boundaries, what they are and how they work. So that you have, and a simple example of that is in different cultural boundaries, like how you say hello in one culture and greet someone could get completely different in another culture. And so understand it's another boundary. And there's all these other boundaries, religion to sex to relationships, all these things that you really have to understand. And at least having a concept of that makes it easier when you get to these other, how to use the energetic boundaries. Step three is an introduction, the very basic introduction to energetic boundaries and how this works, this energy works, and how to manipulate it. Step four is guilt-free no. It tells you how to actually say no and feel good about it.
Will you actually help people figure that out?
Oh, yes. And it's the most intense. It's the longest section of the workshop. And
I can imagine.
It's because it's a deep dive into guilt and shame. Not looking guilt and shame the same way by the time it's over. It'll completely change your relationship to it.
Wow.
So step five is the full on energetic boundaries. There's what you get all the bells and whistles and the tools to go with that. Step six is deepening into more tools and teaching you how to use your clairvoyance, your intuition, and interoception, these other tools, and how different energies play into this. And then step seven is integrating all of these pieces together until you have the whole package.
Wow. That's a lot. That's ambitious. I'm like thinking, I'm like, gosh, so there's a lot to unpack there.
There is. It took me 2 years to create it. And a lot of recording, a lot of re-recording, a lot of rewriting. But I offer CEs for therapists and some other professions. And so it's slated at 24 hours of work. And that's what I sort of consider what most people probably on average to do it. And some people are taking longer because they want to dig deeper into the sections and really go into it. I ask a lot of really interesting questions, and we have a 95-page workbook that goes with this. It's in a PDF form. It takes you through the whole thing. So,
wow, I do like that. The first one is having to like go back into your childhood and figure out how you were programmed, and basically unprogram all of it.
If you have to look at the programming before you can undo it.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's so many people who are just like, whatever happened to me in my childhood is whatever happened to me then. That doesn't affect me now. I'm like, it affects everything you do now. I think I read somewhere a neuroscientist said that like 95% of your behaviors is based on past experiences or in your subconscious.
Yes, and that's all based upon childhood and what you learned from your parents because they taught you how the world works, and you assume that our parents are gods. They know everything. Until they
yeah, and you're just like, oh, and it's very disappointing when you realize that they're not.
Yeah, it's a very rude awakening, but useful and necessary if you're going to become an individual and have your own life. Yes.
Yeah. One of the things you specialize in is, men sexually abused as children. um do you do the same kind of work with that, or do you focus on EMDR and then
Well, ultimately we'll do EMDR. I mean, there's no better trauma tool out there as far as I'm concerned. And people who know what they're doing. I've cleared so many rapes for women in a single session. It's just gone. And suddenly they're able to be in a relationship. I've seen so many of them get married a year later because all of a sudden they were available to be there in a way that they weren't before. And so I'm actually a trauma specialist. I have those specialties, but when people have had really awful childhoods or all these horrendous rapes and trauma, I'm the person often that gets into. So like, oh, you can clean this up.
You clean this up. Fix this.
I'm not afraid of it. And it's because
Right.
I've been through it. So there's a fearlessness in me and a confidence in me, I think, that holds that container, knowing that they can come out the other side of this and be a whole person.
That's very true. Yeah.
And so that's really essential that I have. And that's where doing my own healing makes me a better therapist, because I know what this means to go through this. There's no guesswork on my part in that particular piece. I know the pain that's involved, and I also know it's survivable.
Yeah, and I can imagine whenever, someone is stuck on a piece, you're more relatable to them, and then they can trust you more in that sense.
Well, they can feel it. I mean, so many men say, "You really understand." I said,
Yeah.
and that's without knowing my story. They could tell that I really knew what was going on.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I was sexually abused as a child by my father. And I've done a lot of work. And I actually it all started with EMDR. I mean, there was a lot of other stuff. It was like that kind of rolled into other traumas and more traumas, and
Never one trauma.
I know there really isn't. Um,
No.
but the EMDR is what I felt kind of put out the fire, because I couldn't even talk about it. And it was the EMDR that actually helped me say it out loud. I've spoken about this in my other podcast. I've done a lot in psychedelics, in psychedelic assisted therapy, and that has helped me tremendously. But I really do feel like it was the EMDR that kind of really opened me up to being able to recognize it and be honest with myself, that this is actually what had happened. Going back, trying to be honest with yourself really goes a long way in the healing process, to just start your healing process.
It's impossible to heal without being honest with yourself,
Yeah.
I think.
Yes.
Otherwise, you're just playing all these mind games and avoidance and wasting your time. And sometimes you have to go through that to get there, but you ultimately have to be honest about your life and who you are and what happened to you. Then you can do something about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I also read that you do work with bi and gay heterosexually married men.
Yes.
I haven't talked about that at all on my podcast, and I think that's really interesting, because I feel like, there are more people who are dealing with that than we know.
Well, okay. So let me do just a bit on that.
Mhm.
The statistics are something like 1 in 6 boys and 1 in 3 girls are sexually abused. That's grossly nonsense. And there's growing evidence and research showing that boys are probably sexually abused more than girls,
Mm.
because girls are generally protected in some form. The boys are just sent out to the world and say, take care of yourself.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so they get into all these situations and they don't come home and tell mom that I just got forced to give head to this guy, or these other myriad of possibilities that happen. Some of them even think they're lucky in the moment. And I can't tell you that
Mhm.
like young men who are sexually abused by female school teachers, which
Yeah.
is so common. I can't tell you, but they consider themselves lucky. But the damage done to them, because a child's brain is developing. And so an adult can generate a lot more sexual energy and juice. And so consequently, if they're pouring that into the child, it's like plugging a 110 outlet or 110 plug-in into a 220 outlet, and it blows up. And so you're psychosexually stuck at the age of the abuse until such time as the abuse is cleared.
Yeah.
So that causes sexual compulsivity. And once you go back and clean up the trauma, all of a sudden the compulsivity goes away. So all this nonsense about sexual addiction we're shaming people about their sexuality when they're trauma survivors.
Wow. That is so fascinating. Just because I feel like I've heard this story before, someone was abused by an older woman and everyone was like, "Oh yeah, that's amazing. Lucky you." And then they had to feel like they needed to take that in as, "Oh yeah, lucky me. I guess I should be grateful or thankful this happened to me." But I'd like to actually talk about what does that, like you said, I mean, I think it's fascinating that you mentioned the sexual addiction part to that, because I feel like that's so relevant. But I would like you to expand on that a little bit more, because I'm just now my mind's a little blown.
Well, for instance, I had a client many years ago that uh, when he was around, I'm sorry, I can't remember his exact age, somewhere between 9 and 12. He was at the public pool. He's a gay little boy. He didn't really know it at the time. And this 21-year-oldish guy decides to masturbate in front of him in the locker room. And he was completely overwhelmed by the energy coming toward him, and he was stimulated. And so he then spent the next 20, 30 years going from bathroom to bathroom, recreating that experience because he was unconsciously trying to resolve it. But it was
Mm,
also since it was his first sexual experience, it was his programming to what erotic energy was. And so he
mm,
was looking for that over and over and over again. And so a corollary to the bi and gay heterosexually married men, most of them were sexually abused as children. And so that creates this denial in them. Well, I wouldn't be having these other feelings if that hadn't happened to me.
interesting.
And so they've got this whole denial going. And sometimes they're just bisexual, but often the ones who are in trouble are the ones that were sexually abused, and they're trying to manage all this unsuccessfully. So back to the trauma. So that's why, and exposure to porn can do the same thing. If these where kids are getting into porn much too early, and boys in particular are sneaking around getting the magazines, not so much magazines since it's all available online. And so
Mhm.
again, they're getting hyper stimulated with all this energy before they're psychologically and physiologically ready to handle that level of stimulation without sufficient education about what it is they're seeing and what they're experiencing. So
Wow.
they think that kind of overwhelm is what they're looking for in a sexual experience. They're out on the search for that constant because that's what programmed from the was your first experience sets up your whole experience of sexuality. And like you and I, we had to work through that in order to get to our sexuality. Overt for
Yeah.
us, but it's not overt to these people because they think that's just normal. It's just what happened. It's not.
Right. And
And
then we just slap sexual addiction.
right on top of it and shame and humiliate them and say you're sick and because you have this lifelong illness that you can never get over. But I had so many guys go through SLAA and so forth, come to me. I do the EMDR on their sexual history, and they stop being sexually compulsive. It just completely changes their life. So I'm furious at these people who are shaming people about their sexuality. It just pisses me off.
No, I don't blame you. So then I mean, so EMDR is would be a great if let's say there is a person who's like who let's say they think, yeah, no, I wasn't sexually abused. I wanted it. It was an a I don't want to say to you a babysitter or something.
Common,
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 very common.
common. Oh my God, the stories I could tell you.
Yes, exactly. I mean, how do they seek help? And I guess it's them being honest with themselves, but what if they don't know to be honest with
Well,
themselves
they don't
because
not educating people about it. So we're not giving people real sexual education. So
mm,
you're getting real sexual education, then you should cover this. Well, if you've been exposed to this for sexual energy early in your life, these are the possible things that could happen as a result of that.
wow.
That's how they find out or should find out. But no, we barely give them the birds and the bees in terms of the very basic information, and certainly nothing that explains all this energy and what's going on and how it works. It's like you're just supposed to automatically know. It's like, no.
Wow.
Yeah, we're setting kids up to be abused. We just are. I mean, I remember another guy who, very straight guy, who worked for this gay guy and ended up getting a blowjob from him. And it completely confused him because it was so pleasurable to him. He says, well, if I'm straight, how could this have been so pleasurable for me? Because it's simply a pleasurable act.
Right, right.
So it took him a long time to untangle that because he was clearly straight, but he had all this trauma going on around that because he didn't know how to resolve that. I shouldn't feel pleasure from something. Well, I can tell you straight guys have sex with gay guys all the time. And they're really clear they're straight because their emotions they're not going to fall in love with the guy, but they're going to enjoy the pleasure from it. And they're just there for the pleasure.
Right. And then there's a lot to separate there.
Yes, exactly.
That we don't. Everything feels so integrated, but except where it actually matters, like when it comes to trauma and behavior.
Yeah, so I'm getting really deep in the weeds here with you a little bit, but I hope that's okay. There's just this, it's such a complicated topic, and we try and pretend sex is so simple. It's not. Even in a relationship. One of my favorite things I bitch about in the workshop is merging. Is that we get told that couples, the two shall become as one. And you merge into this big glom. It's a great way to kill sex. But sex happens at the contact boundary. If you're merged, you're killing the excitement that's happening. And merger is bad. As I said, the only time merger is good is with that baby. Because if you do it in the relationship, it's going to harm the relationship and kill it in one form or another.
Yeah, you're right. I'm just thinking like, my husband and I, it took a lot of us having to kind of deal with our own traumas for us to begin to like grow and evolve together. I think it was like for me, as someone who's a trauma survivor and who was putting my own shit on my husband, it was very much like, no, you need to know this about me. You need to feel how I feel. When you're right. No, that was where everything went wrong.
Yes, of course. Of course.
And I didn't even know it.
And sexual abuse survivors usually marry sexual abuse survivors. And I also don't like sexual abuse survivor because I think it's saying that you never recover.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I haven't come up with a better word. We were a sexual abuse victim, but that we don't have to stay a victim.
Right. Right. I think that's why I have my podcast, a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast.
Right. But
I feel like we're thriving.
Never recover. It's a whole 12-step model is that you are this and you're going to be this forever.
Yeah.
And I have a problem with that. So
yes. I agree. I think that, I mean, for the longest time, I mean, I didn't tell anybody about what had happened to me. I didn't even, every time the idea came into my head or the thought of it came into my head, I was just like pushing it down further and further until it just exploded. But it was really, it was really hard. And, I never thought that I could be thriving. Like that was a word. Thriving, a trauma survivor thriver is a.
No, exactly. Well, we don't have any model for recovery in our society for healing. And so, and there are therapists that don't have any idea how to deal with this because it triggers their own stuff because they've never done their own work. So
that's the problem. That's the problem that I feel like we're all seeing is, I think there's so much truth and so much healing to be done with somebody who has gone through it. Like you were saying, people trust you. They feel the energy. They feel like they can heal just by learning and working with you. And I think that's so important.
well, I think a therapist's job ultimately is to offer unconditional love. That to be there with this person and hold them in the most loving way possible, not judging them, but yet encouraging them to face their pain and to walk through that dark night so they can come out into the light.
Yeah.
But it requires a therapist having done their work to make that happen. So
this is true. This is true. I was in therapy for 20 years.
Mm,
Just traditional therapy though. Like I didn't, I know you say you specialize in trauma, and I feel like there's a difference between just traditional like talk therapy and I do therapy with an internal family systems therapist where I really dive deep into my own stuff. Um, but I did waste a good 20 years just talking about what had happened to me within the last week, and then
yeah. No,
I,
to the core of what's going on. So when I see a client, I have a whole set of homework they have to do.
mm,
And so I have a big picture of what's going on and where the traumas are. Because I do it in such a way that, like, one of the things I do that annoys them to no end is that I require them to write a timeline of their life. And for
mm,
each year of their life, for as far back as they can remember, they have to write 1 to 3 things that take them back to being that age. I lived on Washington Street, moved to Chicago, rape. I mean, they tell me all of these things that happened. They don't even realize sometimes are traumas. And so it just comes out. So I have a real map of really how they're put together.
Wow. Yeah. I had to do that one because I went into a treatment center for about 31 days. And that was one of my homework. That was the thing I had to do, one of the first things I had to do. And I had to explore that. And I was like, this is
Not
a
fun.
lot. No,
It,
it's not fun. Nothing,
Therapy
none of
isn't
that was
always
fun.
it's healing or can
It's
be,
healing.
not
Ye-
fun.
Yes, it was very healing. It was hard work. It's hard work, you have to get into the place where, you can see the ugly stuff that's happened and be able to understand, you know, how to move through it and
Well, you have to rearrange the blocks
rearrange the blocks. I like
because we
that.
formed this whole block house growing up in our world, and then we realized that this is not real, and we're going to redo this in order to have our own life and to be real in the world and be able to be available to other people, especially our partners and children. So,
Mhm. Wow. Well, Merle, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you feel is important for this audience to hear?
well, this could go on for hours.
I
Uh,
know.
uh, the other side is worth the price of giving.
Mm,
I mean, it doesn't look like it when you're in the middle of all this pain and you're overwhelmed by all the stuff. But the truth is that you can stay in misery. And a lot of people do because they know their misery. They're comfortable with their misery
right,
and
exactly.
around a long time and and shaking the tree and seeing what falls out. It seems like a really scary idea. And in the moment it is. Like as I told my therapist, I could feel there was something inside of me. I didn't know what it was, but I was willing to face that, whatever it was. But again, my whole personality is about facing the truth and just getting to the truth. Uh, Hence the title of my last book, "Facing the Truth of Your Life," and it's really a romp through your life. Actually, I really bring up a whole lot of stuff, and I take on a lot of sacred cows. I don't believe in self love. I think there's a better path. I don't believe in forgiveness. I think there's a much better path to
Mhm.
that. Uh, but these are all these sacred cows we have in our society that are supposed to make everything better. I mean, how many people have told you, "Oh, I who said they forgave this person, they came to you and said, I didn't really forgive them." For
Yeah.
lying. Because it's what you're supposed to say.
Yeah.
Part of
No.
our Christian culture that we're supposed to say we forgive them. And I think it's just a really bad idea. That's
Right.
not
That's not healing. Yeah, I don't think just saying I forgive you is really anything but just words coming out, right? Like I
yes.
think, I mean for me, and I talk about this a lot, about my own personal healing with, dealing with my father. It was actually during an MDMA assisted therapy session where I I actually saw my father's his childhood and his abuse. And
Oh,
I was able to just
that's
be
for him.
exactly. I didn't forgive what he did, but
No,
I
that-
understood.
yes, compassion is not the same thing as forgiveness.
Right. It's not. It's
So
not.
my shtick on forgiveness briefly is just that our job is to take back all of our power from this person that we gave them.
Yeah.
Look at the anger, take back all the needing for them to offer an apology or for a need for them to do anything in particular, because your job is to take care of you, not you can't control them.
Right.
Their job is to offer an apology and make amends. And so if you quote unquote forgive them, you're depriving them of the opportunity of doing their healing,
Mm. Wow. Well
letting them
said.
the hook. And that's not okay. They have to go through their healing. Otherwise, they're not going to get the benefit of this experience.
Right. Yeah.
I have a whole chapter on this. It pisses off people to no end, but you understand what I'm talking about.
No,
Having
I do. I do.
so many of them don't, and particularly religious, deeply religious people, it just pushes all these buttons.
Mm. Yeah, no, I think the forgiveness has to be for you. It has to be for you. And I had to forgive myself for being so angry. I didn't understand. I didn't understand. I thought everything it was something that was happening to me. He did this to hurt me. And it took a lot for me to realize that no, he had his own problems.
Yeah, you were an object in his fantasy, but it wasn't about you.
It wasn't about me. It wasn't about me. Yep. And
Rudely,
that
yes.
oh.
And then self-love, just another example. We use self-love as this coat to protect ourselves from other people. And
Hmm.
what it does, it creates a boundary between you and them. So I believe the real task is self-acceptance.
Self-acceptance. I like that. I know
You,
I say self-love a lot. Say
people do,
self-love a lot.
but they're different meanings. Self-love is like, and so yeah, I think, yeah, I think it gets used as this coat to protect yourself from other people, and I think that just creates a boundary between you and other people that's not particularly healthy. But love happens at the contact boundary. It doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about merging. And if you accept yourself, you're going to be a lot more available into the world as opposed to
That's right.
needing people. And love, I think, is something you give to others and others give you.
Mm-hmm.
So why are you trying to stay in this loop and close them out of deflecting love actually coming in? You're so busy loving
Mm-hmm.
yourself, then how can they possibly get through that? But if you accept you, that makes you available to be present in the moment because there isn't anything going on.
That's very fascinating.
So
Yes.
it gives you the
Self-acceptance.
why the book is controversial for some people. So I go after all this stuff, and so and
Well, everybody needs to check out the book.
there's one chapter called the victim identity disorder that melted down 3 different editors because they recognized themselves.
Oh, wow.
It's like melting. Fortunately, one of them actually called me. 2 of them just disappeared because it was so upsetting to them. But the one called me and said, "Help!" And I said, "Do this." He said, "You're kidding." I said, "No, do what I told you." But he did it, and he says, "Oh, that worked."
Oh, that worked. There you go.
So
That's when you know it's a good book.
it's challenging. It's a really challenging book because it's really about taking to walk through your life and taking a look at yourself and in a really deep way. And so uh, and I wrote it to heal, to help people heal and to give them a way of looking at themselves in a very different way. So that's what's called facing the truth of your life. It's available in audio, in ebook, and in paperback. So
Wow. Well, thank you so much. Doing the challenging work, facing your life. I think that's where the real growth is.
it is.
It is.
We went to get everybody else. We didn't have to deal with our stuff. We're out there busy fixing everybody else. But no, the real fix is here.
Right. Right. Can you imagine if each of us all fixed our own shit?
What a different world this would be.
It would be. It really would be. It's we have there's so much power within us. So But I do appreciate you coming on and sharing your wisdom, and I'm really excited about your book. I'm gonna
Well,
check it
thank you.
out, and I encourage everyone else to. That was Merle Yost, psychotherapist and author of Facing the Truth of Your Life. For more information on Merle and how to purchase his book, you can go ahead and check out the show notes. January's issue of Authentic Insider is out. Check out Authentic Insider at traumasurvivorthriver.com. That's traumasurvivorthriver.com, as well as past episodes of Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my email list to get Authentic Insider magazine in your inbox monthly. We will be back when I speak with neurosequential specialist Martin Sims about the important roles youth sports coaches can play in recognizing trauma in children. You've been listening to a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. I'm Lori Lee Binstock. Thank you for being a part of the conversation. Take care.